We used to sit around fires in a circle and we would put the important stuff up on walls as pictures. Photos are something mysterious and magical and beautiful that really can bridge relationships, even difficult relationships.
Like a lot of you in my work, I'm responsible for starting a lot of conversations. I interview people, I facilitate dialogue, lead strategic development processes, coordinate teams, co-create materials. There are a lot of meetings, a lot of reasons to connect, and all these things depend on our ability to engage with each other. I think that's often easiest when we're comfortable and familiar with the other people in the room. But also some of our most important conversations that our communities need to have are going to require us to connect across significant differences, building bridges towards shared understanding and future cooperation. There's always going to be some awkwardness at the start of that meeting or in that stretch. But what can we do as leaders to help everyone involved to find each other as quickly as possible, build trust, and work together to build a larger and more inclusive community that's able to take on tougher problems? That's what today's guest is working on. Roman Williams is a sociologist, the founder of an organization called Interfaith Photovoice, and the author of Sacred Snaps, Photovoice for Interfaith Engagement. Roman, I've been looking forward to this conversation and ever since I got the chance to join one of your workshops, so welcome to Storylinking. Thank you for coming on.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited to have this conversation.
So I'd love to start with your origin story, Roman. You've described your work as combining two things you love, photography and sociology. When did you realize that those two things fit together?
Yeah, that's an interesting thing. So in graduate school, I was on a project with my mentor, and she had this idea. We were studying the way people live religion in daily life, not like what religious leaders might say, a theologian might say, a pastor, priest, rabbi, imam. Not interested. What we want to see is where the rubber meets the road. And she had this idea for the research process. We're doing what we called these life history interviews. And we asked people to kind of lay out their lives, but then we wanted to follow it up with another technique. We were just calling it photo interviews. And it was this idea that she had heard about and was a little bit uncertain in terms of the methodology, and said, Roman, you're into photography. Go see what you can find out about this technique. So there I was in the Boston University Library back in the early 2000s at one of those lovely terminals where you kind of typed in your search and figured out where to find the article. And I got this really interesting hit. And the title of the article, a couple came up, but the one that caught my eye was titled Becoming a Visual Sociologist. And that was the first time I had heard that term, visual sociologist. And I was immediately enthusiastic, curious, and dove right into that article. That article was written by someone named John Grady, who is pretty well known in the field, and he's become a friend, a mentor over the years. He's retired now, but really that's where I found out that there are sociologists that instead of doing surveys or interviews, they're using photography and videography and drawing and arts-based, visual-based methodologies for helping to bridge that gap between the researcher and the interviewee. And there's a gap there, right? There's this persona whenever I would show up, even though I was a lowly graduate student and you know, I show up, I might as well have a lab coat on and a clipboard, and I must know something. I must have secret knowledge that the interviewee doesn't have. But as soon as you start asking folks to help you see through their lens, literally through their smartphone camera. Well, we didn't have smartphones quite yet at that point in my career. We gave people disposable cameras with film in them that we would have to take to the drugstore and have processed and printed. But being able to see their lives through their lenses and the approach that images invites really helped me see that first of all, there is a big gap between me and the person that I'm having conversation with. And secondly, that photography in particular, which is sort of my focus, can really help to bridge that gap.
And you've done that with a process called Photovoice. So for someone who's never heard of Photovoice, what is it? Where does it come from? What does a Photovoice session even look like?
Yeah, great question. So Photovoice isn't something I've invented. It's something that's been around since the early 1990s. It comes out of a project that was done in Yunnan province, China, where some public health researchers were trying to understand the experiences of rural village life, and they wanted to understand the health needs of women in those villages. And so they did normal social sciencey things like focus groups and interviews and surveys, and for whatever reason felt that there was something still missing. And one of the researchers, a graduate student, I think she was at the University of California, Berkeley, if I remember correctly, named Caroline Wong. Her name is really well associated with this tool, Photovoice. She and the project director were having a conversation, and they both liked photography, and they said, well, what if we gave these women some cameras, taught them some basic photography, and asked them to make some photographs about their daily lives? What would that give us? So they gave it a try, and lo and behold, it was brilliant. They ended up giving cameras and rolls of film to a little over 60 women for a year's time, and each month they would go through a roll of film, and then every quarter they would bring them together for conversations using those photographs. And those photographs began to reveal things in daily life that they couldn't see. It was almost like each of those photos was a number on a bar graph that was piling up to make information visible. So one of the pictures that always stands out to me is this woman, and she's in a cornfield, and she has a hoe, and she's kind of going after the weeds in between the corn stalks. And nearby on a blanket is her infant. And from Western eyes, you see that and think, oh, maybe she just has a hobby farm, or this is her little plot next to her home, or maybe it's take your kid to work day. You just don't know from a Western perspective. Turns out this was not only her every day, but many of the women face this problem, this challenge of having adequate childcare for their children. And so kids would end up being taken along to work. It's not a terribly big deal, I guess, if you're just hoeing between corn. It's not ideal for your child to be out there in the field. But what about other cases where, like, what if you're farming tobacco and all the chemicals that are involved, and your kid's not an infant on a blanket, but they're 3 years old, and they're running through that tobacco field and all of the chemicals and whatever else, like from the plant itself, you can pick up in your system. Very unhealthy. Or what about the child that during this project that they were doing back in the 90s, what about the child that tragically dies drowning because there wasn't any adult watching them that day? So they began to see challenges like this that the women were facing, and identified a number of what we would call social problems. At the end of the project, they had over 40,000 pictures. And they helped the women curate those photos into an exhibition that they could take on the road. And during each exhibit, they would have an opening night celebration, a reception, and invite stakeholders, and I'm sure friends and family and journalists and whatnot, as well as policymakers. And they wanted to reach those policymakers with the insights from those photographs. And they would station the women from the project near their own pictures and invite them to tell their own story. So here's this woman in kind of what, if we put it in sort of an American context, we might think about a backwoodsy, off the beaten path kind of a part of their country. Many of these women were undereducated, only a first or second grade education, people that you wouldn't think about as having much power in the world. Now they're standing next to their photo in an art gallery setting with leaders coming up to them, being interested about their work. And those photos gave the women a voice. And that's where this term photo voice gets its name. Since the 90s, photo voice has been growing, and mostly growing within public health. I would say majority of projects happen under that umbrella. Between education and public health, I bet that's 85 or 90% of all projects are happening in those spheres. And it really wasn't until I came along that anybody was in a systematic, large-scale way using Photovoice as a tool for interfaith and, to some extent, intergroup engagement. Most of the time when people think about Photovoice and use it, they're working toward that end goal, that project of bringing about social change, of giving people who don't have a voice. And that's certainly very much part and parcel of the work that I do, the work that Interfaith Photovoice does. But there's a dimension, I think, that's missed in some Photovoice work. Because of the focus on that end goal, they miss the possibility, the power that I've discovered that happens on the journey to change. And that journey to change involves people in small group dialogue, sharing photos, sharing details of their everyday lives. And I've seen the power of it to bridge divides within groups that I've worked with. Now, this was probably happening in that original Photovoice project. There were 4 distinct ethnic groups involved among those women. But for whatever reason, that wasn't the emphasis of that early project. So these days, we're bringing together people from different religious, spiritual, secular backgrounds to have conversations about what do their beliefs, practices, and values look like in daily life? What are the bridges and barriers to belonging that you experience in your community, in your company, in your congregation, in daily life? What does that look like? And what are some ways that we might change the world? What are some of your ideas? And inviting people to interact with their social world, to take their smartphone and, instead of turning it on themselves as a selfie, turning it outward as a window to look at what's going on in the world, to have these critical, personal conversations, to build a small community within the group that then can find its voice together.
I love that in terms of stepping back. So myself as like a creative professional and a storyteller, right? Like it's easy to be that person who barges into a community with a camera and says, I have the questions and I'm going to ask them, and you're going to tell a story, and then I'll package it up and I'll get it out to the people who need to hear it. And I can even be doing that on your behalf, but doing that in an incredibly presumptive way where I'm the architect of the narrative, as opposed to stepping back into doing that process with you. And I would, part of what I hear even in the basic approach of Photovoice is like to start with, hey, could you please show me? Like, not that I even know what question to ask, but let's be a little bit observational together and just try to get some basic context for the world.
Yeah, for sure. You know, there's a sociologist, Howard Becker. He, fellow visual sociologist, he talks about photos as answers to questions that I might not have known to ask. So when you invite someone into this process, oh my goodness, it's a hoot, because when we do projects, we'll ask people to send us their photos prior to a meeting. We like to print them out if we can, if we're doing it in person. And so I get to see all these photos and make up my own stories for what is happening in them. And so often my presumption is way off. There's this photo that I sometimes show. A young woman, 12 years old, in fact, was involved in a project. I was mentoring a teenager in how to use Photovoice. And so I was joining their meetings via Zoom. and kind of just there paying attention. But I saw the pictures as they were coming in, and the project was around hope. It was a collaboration with a national organization here in the U.S. Called Braver Angels. And Braver Angels tries to bridge divides when it comes to political sensibilities. Anyways, so we're doing this project on hope with teens, run by a teen. One of the pictures that came in was a picture of an Amazon delivery truck. And I immediately thought, Amazon delivery truck, this is about hope. Okay, I hope the package is for me. That's good. That's clever. Or maybe if there's a nuance here, I hope the package is on my doorstep when I get home from work, because maybe I live in that kind of neighborhood where it's a question. Or maybe I hope that the workers are being taken care of. Or maybe I hope that this doesn't close down all the brick and mortar stores. That's as far as I could get with hope. And I thought I had done pretty well telling myself the story that I thought I was going to encounter behind this young woman's photo. I was completely wrong. The truck, it turns out, is one of the Rivian electric vehicles. And for this young person, that was a glimmer of hope that the world is beginning to change and that we're going to do a better job taking care of the environment. And this was her great hope. Totally blew me away. This young person, such a brilliant twist. And that picture actually ended up in the exhibit that they did. And it starts off, and her caption, in a conversation with her, I said, hey, this is what I thought you were going to talk about. So her caption gets to that, and it kind of unpacks that. You might think I was hoping. So these pictures let us see, as you suggested, Tom, let us see things that we might not have seen otherwise.
In your book, you talk about stepping back into religion as an opportunity for that. And I wonder if you could share just a little bit of your background. What kind of brought you to working with religious communities and why you saw that as a relevant application for Photovoice?
Yeah, that's a great question. So personally, I'm a Christian. I'm someone that aspires, but I'm not great at. I aspire to love my neighbor. I feel like that's what I'm supposed to do in the world. And I feel very fortunate to have stumbled on what I think is a way that I can do that professionally. And so I see my work as a facilitator of conversations that help people bridge divides, that our work really is helping people of all sorts, religious, non-religious, to do something I think the world needs a little bit more of. So why religious communities specifically? So every sociologist you meet is a sociologist of something, whether that's of race and gender or whatever. My field happens to be sociology of religion. So it was a natural step from having this toolkit of visual sociology to studying the ways that people live their faith in everyday life. And so my interest is less on what the leader might say religion is all about, and more interested in where the rubber meets the road for the everyday person. And how this particular toolkit is well suited for understanding the ways people live out religion and spirituality in their daily lives. And over time, I've had some really neat opportunities to teach those tools. And one of them was at Duke Divinity School, where I was an adjunct lecturer, and I'd come in and teach for a week. And I was teaching basically congregational leaders so pastors mostly, how to use social science tools to understand their context, their congregation, the place in which they were located. And I started doing that in 2016. And so January 2016, flew from Grand Rapids, Michigan, where I'm based, down to Duke in Durham, and taught the class, and through that, kind of made some friends. Many of these pastors were my age-ish, and we had a lot in common and remained in touch after the course. And in 2017, I was back at Duke teaching the same class to a new cohort. So while I was there, I thought, well, I want to reconnect with some of the people that I've become friends with. And one of them, Michael Boss, who's a minister in New York City, he and I decided we were going to have lunch. And before we got too far into that lunch, we both expressed deep concerns about things that had been said by the newly elected Donald Trump on the campaign trail about brown-skinned people from other countries who happen to be Muslim. And it was one of these moments of us saying, well, what's a minister in New York City and a visual sociologist in Grand Rapids? What are we supposed to do about this? It was a time when, all the lawn signs were coming out, right? And, love your neighbor and these sorts of things. And so we put our heads together and came up with this idea. Michael had spent the better part of 10 years living and working in the Sultanate of Oman, doing peace building and interfaith work there. And he knew my background as a visual sociologist. And we put these pieces together and said, well, what would it look like to use Photovoice for interfaith engagement? And we got a little grant from a place called the Louisville Institute. And we were off and running, did a few projects, one in Richmond, Virginia, through some connections that Bill had, or I'm sorry, that Michael had. The person in Richmond is Bill Sachs, who's one of our co-authors. And we did a project in Grand Rapids, Michigan, through connections here, and then also Fredericton, New Brunswick, Canada, where my friend Kathy Holtman is a professor. And we gave it a try. We brought together Christians and Muslims. We walked them through a Photovoice process that involved 5 or 6 meetings. We invited them to wrestle with their own beliefs and practices and the challenges that each of them face in the world and what a better world would look like. We put on exhibitions in each of those places. And by 2019, we felt like we were onto something, that this could be a viable tool for doing not just Muslim-Christian dialogue, but interfaith dialogue more broadly.
I'd love to get into a little bit of the mechanics of how something like that works. Like how do you get people into the room or the Zoom, and then like what happens once you're there?
Yeah. Well, oftentimes we'll collaborate typically with someone that wants to do this work, someone that has said, we want a different approach that, well, let me back up. Interfaith work oftentimes involves a dialogue between religious leaders who are up on a stage in front of an audience. So a pastor, an imam, and a rabbi talking about some topic. Maybe it's a practice, maybe it's a value. And people come and watch them and learn from them. And it can be an important intellectual thing that happens. But too infrequently, people who come to that never actually talk to someone from a different religion. They never build a relationship across difference. And so over the last, 15, 20 years, there's been this slow, more of a grassroots movement to do interfaith from the ground up. Let's do service projects together. Let's do quilts together. Let's have a foodies group. Let's have a book group. Let's be more active and interpersonal. And so oftentimes a group will invite us into their organization, onto their campus, into their community to do a project. And a typical project, when it's done in person, involves a series of meetings. prior to those meetings, we'll often do a workshop, kind of a come and see what this is like, a workshop, Tom, like the one that you attended online with us, where we pick a topic that just about anybody can access. So gratitude. Everybody seems to have a picture of something they're thankful for on their smartphone. It could be the beautiful sunset that just happened recently, or it could be a new baby that they are connected to, or the random parking space in a busy city that seemed to magically open up at the right time. We all have those pictures. So we'll invite people in a workshop to form small groups that, as best as we can tell, have some diversity to them. And then we walk them through a storytelling process where we basically focus on each person for 8 to 10 minutes, give that person a chance to tell the story behind one of their photos, give everybody else in the group a chance to ask them some questions, and then some time for that person to respond. And in that workshop experience, you're getting the flavor of what a project could be. A project strings together multiple experiences like that around several topics that move us from getting acquainted with each other, learning about one another's beliefs, practices, and values, to considering the ways that they experience belonging in the world, and ways in which the world is pushing back and making it hard to be a part of the culture of the community, and then using their cameras, their smartphones, to begin envisioning, well, what does a different world look like? And oftentimes that session can be a little challenging because we're trying to make pictures of things that don't exist yet. And so people tend to be brilliant and creative and are always surprising me with their ability to see in ways that aren't literal. And at the end of that process, so at end of 4 or 5 meetings, we have a stack of photos. A typical project will have between 400 and 600 pictures, and we comb through them together and decide what's the narrative here, what are the themes, what are the biggest challenges that we want people to be able to see and wrestle with. And so from a social science standpoint, a problem isn't a problem until it's been articulated as such, until it's been defined and framed. And so this is a framing process. Photovoice sometimes is talked about as a needs assessment process, where we're identifying the shared needs and concerns people have, and then putting them on display for their community in front of people that really their job, so to speak, their role in life is to address those things. So if we came across, for example, a public safety issue in a community, we'd want to invite public safety to come and hear about that. If we came across some other kind of issue, we would always be turning to the people in that context who have the responsibility to tend to those needs and invite them in when it's time to have an opening night for an art exhibit. And it's presented as winsomely as possible. There's a time and place for, being vocal and angry and in your face. Our approach, at least what I've found, is that people respond differently when you have a photograph and a story and make it invitational, and oftentimes they're more willing to listen. So that's the approach that we try to take.
Yeah, I would vouch for that from my limited experience in the session I joined. The prompt was about gratitude, and it's a relatively small group of people I had never met, and I was blown away by how quickly people started to connect and how safe the space felt. Josh was facilitating, a member of your team, and he just did a wonderful job of putting out some ground rules. And in that, it must have been 45 minutes on the first part of the session, we went from a group of people who had never met each other in a Zoom to sharing photos and the group asking questions, and really thoughtful questions. And it was, so one of the photos I shared was of one of my kids, my older kid reading to my younger kid. And I was like, this makes me feel grateful, because the moments are not all like this, right? As a parent, but you have those wins, and it makes you feel really hopeful for kind of the future of our world, as well as maybe I'm not messing things up too much. And then the questions were, someone asked me about like the Pokemon stickers on my kid's bed in the background. And someone else asked me about like how I try to pass on hope and gratitude to my kids. And it was just like the conversation was so much richer than if I just showed up and tried to talk about what gratitude means to me. Cause it's hard to put things like that into words. And it's hard to just even know where to start when you're even trying to share your own complexity.
Absolutely. Yeah, that photo really, I think of photos as a booster rocket of sorts that puts us into orbit much more quickly than a question on its own. Like, what do you think gratitude is? What is it to you? Define it. Tell us a story about it. It's a lot easier when we've externalized part of ourselves. It's easier to talk about that picture. It's an object outside of us. It opens us up in a new way. And people connect with that photograph. It invites us to do something I think is deep in our DNA, something we've been doing since we lived in caves, right? We used to sit around fires in a circle and we would put the important stuff up on walls as pictures. And we've been doing that ever since. The most recent iteration is the smartphone, but I'm old enough to remember these things called a photo album. And we would keep one in a sacred place in our living room growing up on the coffee table. And when someone came over that you wanted to share something from your life with, you'd sit next to them on the sofa. You'd open that book up, and lo and behold, one side of that book, one cover of it would be on my knee and the other one would be on your knee. And it created this bridge between us. Literally, there's like there. Photos have the same effect. They are something mysterious and magical and beautiful that really can bridge relationships, even difficult relationships.
Your use of the word sacred in that context, I think, is powerful, just in that, like, part of what I love about a good movie or a home video or any artifact from my childhood, right, is it's like these things represent a moment in all of its complexity in a way that, like, I don't have to be able to completely describe, but I know that there's something there. And we can dig into that. You can talk about that as an inflection point. And that's some of my favorite questions from the session I participated in were just that. They were like, talking about, like, literally one of them, I don't think the participant would mind me sharing, was a photo of a cat. And we unpacked that into, like, just this rich context for her life story that, like, I don't know that would have come up in an hour-long Zoom otherwise, right? And so it's this sort of window, if people are willing to let you in, if there's that trust and willingness to engage, which is so much about what I think community builders are looking for, is just that space where people trust each other for a minute.
Yeah. Yeah. We're short on trust these days, aren't we? What I like about this form of dialogue too, typically people don't come into it not knowing what they're going to talk about. So a workshop like the one that you attended, people will know that we're going to talk about gratitude. Usually we let them know ahead of time through an email that they'll be sharing a picture about gratitude. And if they want to put a little bit of time thinking about what that would look like. So they know the topic, they know more or less the story before they show up. Other times I've seen in dialogue, that doesn't happen ahead of time. You don't have that preparation. And when you show up with a photo, you give people permission to everything within that frame. Like you said earlier, Tom, there are Pokemon stickers somewhere in there. Sounds like that wasn't the story necessarily, but there are Pokemon stickers in the background, and someone picked up on them, and that became an entry point into something else, that people saw something in your photo maybe that you didn't even notice or pay attention to, and that invited a part of you out that might not have been invited out. It's also interesting to see this applied. You were in a group of people that really didn't know each other. Imagine what this is like when you do it with a team. So we've been doing team building work over the last year with organizations where It's that quarterly meeting, it's half-day thing that a lot of organizations will do, and they want to just deepen their relationships. And we've been invited in to do work where we've done it around gratitude, we've done it around meaning and purpose in life. One of the things that I'll feel like we're a failure every time if I don't hear someone say something like this. They'll say, I knew Tom for the last 10 months. We've been on the same team, but in the 10 minutes that Tom shared, I know him more completely now than I did from those 10 months. Because it gives us this way to share parts of ourselves. I've made a decision about the picture I'm going to share, so I feel safe about it. And I know the context, the people, maybe, some teams can have a little bit of tension going on, but I kind of have a sense of how to navigate that. And I feel like I can tell this story. And when people leave with those stories in their heads, they're not a collection of words. They're encapsulated by that photograph. They carry around, if you will, a little gallery in their minds. And those pictures and stories, I feel like we hold on to them differently when we have that visual connection than when it's words alone.
I see you creating a space that is vulnerable and kind of fortified by trust. And I experienced that in the session that I participated in. And I felt comfortable stepping into that on the basis that it was going to stay in the Zoom. It wasn't going to leave that space with other people. And so I could be a little bit more open than I might be in a typical conversation with people I don't know. When we're doing this work, or when you're doing this work with people who are trying to bring about some sort of social change or connect this storytelling out to the community, how do you navigate that jump from this is what's okay in the room, this is me sharing my story with you who I trust, and also there's this legislator over here who needs to hear what you have to say?
Yeah, that's a great question. So during our first meeting of a Photovoice project, we'll cover things like visual ethics, and we'll come to an agreement that basically what is shared in this room for now is going to stay in this room. And we remind ourselves of those agreements each time we meet. So across the course of 5 or 6 or how many ever meetings we need to have. And we get to the point at the end where we start reflecting back on what was important. It might be something might be important because it was prevalent. Everybody seemed to have a picture and a story about it. Other people might have important pictures because they helped us to see something no one else in the room could help us to see, and that's important. And we spend a little bit of time reflecting on what was important personally about the project and what's important for the world that we've produced. And we go through a process of curating those photos into the art exhibit, of winnowing down from several hundred to a handful, 20, 30, 40 pictures with titles and captions that can be printed and put up on walls or easels or whatever. And at every stage, participants have the right to say, I'm sorry, I'm not comfortable with that. And there's been some disappointments along the way where I'm like, that was the photo or the story that I think we needed to tell. But for whatever reason, not my business what the reason is, for whatever reason, that person's just not ready. And I have to honor that. It's part of what the way that we try to do our work. It's not going to be successful if we pressure and push. But when that person is ready, we'll be there and we'll be that trusted ally that'll help them tell that story. And there's a danger, I think, that a tension, at least, that I sometimes feel as the facilitator. I'm sure it comes up with creatives and community leaders, that there's this part of you that feels like you're the storyteller. Part of you that feels like the one that's pulling all of these threads together and weaving them. And what I need to remind myself of in those cases is that it's not my story. I try to follow the advice of the folks behind StoryBrand that use the idea of the hero's journey to think about the way that you do your work, how you support people. And basically, there are too many people in the world that they think they're the hero of someone else's journey, that their brand is the hero, that their whatever they're producing, their product is the hero. It's not the case. The hero is the person you're trying to help. And we try to take that role of the person that steps in from the outside with the powerful tool. I fancy myself Yoda and saying, "Here's your lightsaber," right? I fancy myself saying, "I'm Gandalf. I'm not going to fight your battles for you, but here are the tools that you need to do it." And I think that if more folks took that posture, that we might see more people empowered. We might see a little more success, but at the very least, we'd be a little bit more honest about what's really happening and what needs to happen. And that's why I love Photovoice. It fits so well with that mindset, that people are empowered. It's empowering people to find a voice, to tell their story, to be part of the change that they know needs to happen. And I might be able to imagine it, just like I might be able to imagine the story behind someone else's picture when I see it for the first time. I can't put it into words like that storyteller can. I can't talk from the point of view of experience or need or pain or whatever's going on. That needs to be someone else's voice. I can advocate for it. I can stand behind and support. I can help in a lot of ways. But at the end of the day, the story needs to be their story. And the change needs to be their change.
Yeah, I think that's true whether you're trying to research and understand a problem, you're trying to bring people together in a conversation, or you're trying to share that story out with the world. Like at the end of the day, it's a mechanism. You're a part of a system. You're not the system yourself. And I think it's hard to let go, but at the same time, I think that's where the good stuff happens.
Yeah, it's definitely that's where the magic is. I don't think you can over empower people when it comes to need and change. As much of the process as you can put into someone else's hands. Yeah, I have an expertise, but I am one of many people on this team that's going to be part of an organization or be part of a community, a university, whatever. That I'm going to come in and let's use this set of tools. Let's empower you to be the ones that are pursuing change.
One of the things I hear is this is an opportunity, right? And if people step into this process, then there's something really special here. I also know how hard it is to get people to engage in anything that requires effort. Do people ever show up to one of these things not having done the homework, not having a photo ready? And if so, what happens then?
That's a great question. Yeah. So of course, there are plenty of times when people show up unprepared and like, oh, I got to go to this thing. So we have a couple of strategies that we end up using. We'll simply say, well, unfortunately we didn't have a chance to print your photo, so I bet you have a photo you can use that's on your phone. Do you have your smartphone with you? And they might reluctantly be willing then to pull up a photo or two they can use and kind of share electronically. Just kind of hold up their smartphone while they're telling their story. Sometimes we'll come with, I have, over the years, a small stockpile of photographs that are general enough that in that collection, someone might be able to find a picture that they could borrow to use to tell their story. But the percentage of people like if someone's team says this is what we're doing team day, there's typically a boss that's has expectations and you need to perform and show up with your pictures. Sometimes, working with students a lot, students can be distracted by so many opportunities and deadlines and responsibilities and just life. Maybe they forget. We never want someone to feel like they can't participate if they don't have a photo. And so sometimes we'll say, hey, you don't have a photo, and if you want to participate with a photo, find one. If not, you can still participate. You can be part of the conversation. You can listen in and see what other people are talking about, and you can ask questions and interact. We want you to be part of things. Sometimes people just aren't ready to share a photo. Sometimes when we're at that process of collecting people's photos that we'll print eventually for the Photovoice conversation, we'll get questions about, okay, how are these photos going to be used? I'm not one that likes to share my photos, or I'm not someone that makes a lot of pictures, and how does this all going to work? And I'm a little uncertain. Is it okay if I print my own photos? Come as you are, come as you're comfortable. I'm not in the business of pushing people out of their comfort zone. That's not productive.
Yeah. Well, and I hear you going back to that boss or, a community leader, convener, like there's someone right in the community who's saying, hey, we're going to do this thing. It's a good opportunity, inviting people in and trying to give people a context where they can be successful. I know I've really come to appreciate that convener in my work. Like I'm often collaborating with a group of people who I don't know, and having a really caring person who will help people kind of understand what this is about and bridge some trust initially is a big part of kind of getting anyone into the space in the first place. What's the role of that individual once this type of work starts? How do you help, I guess, an organizational leader understand their role in the process? Is it to lead? Is it to sit back? Is it somewhere in between?
Yeah. It really is a case by case. So in a workshop, like I was describing for a team, everybody's welcome, everybody's involved. And we try to, if it's a large enough group, we try to mix those departments up on that larger division so that people are building relationships across those differences. But the role of the leader is to show up and do the work, to participate. You've invited us as your employees to do the work. Maybe you ought to do it as well. Sometimes it's not productive for the leader to be part of the process. So, for example, sometimes we work on universities where there might be a chaplain or a staff person that has helped to organize things. And we'll ask the question sometimes how is their presence in the project, in the dialogue, going to affect what people say and share? There's real value to bringing someone in from outside because it can open up conversations in ways that leader might not be able to. And sometimes, for better or for worse, that leader's presence in the room shapes the context enough where people aren't comfortable sharing certain things. And so it really has to do with the goals of the project and the intergroup dynamics that we encounter with the group.
Does work like this ever, I guess, have unintended consequences? Like I'm thinking of, so from again my lens as a storyteller working with a community, I can come into a community, I can project a narrative, I can look for evidence to support it, and I can, share that story back out to the world. And that may or may not be the most authentic story. Is that ever something that happens in a Photovoice process where it's like, I as a leader authentically want to hear from the community, but I'm bringing so much of my pre-existing context to the process that it's hard to hear what's actually there?
I think that can be the case for sure. I think with our process, we try to complicate people's understanding of what's actually happening in ways that invite multiple voices into the discussion. We use a tool from conflict resolution called reflective structured dialogue. And that tool, part of that tool is a timing sequence that in a small group protects time for a storyteller to be the only voice, for that person to sit quietly while everybody else in the group has a chance to ask questions. We get the questions out before that storyteller answers any one of them. And then there's time at the end that's only for the storyteller to bring their voice back in, to address whatever questions they want to. They can skip questions. It's their time. It's their story. They get to be the voice. And we give that then to every person in the group. And so it helps to level the playing field. It helps. I mean, we've all been part of teams and groups where there are the personalities and the power dynamics and people who have just sort of given up on the process. They need a new way. They need a new way to do things. And this is a new way to have those difficult conversations that sometimes get stalled because of the personalities and leadership structure.
Is Photovoice often connected to advocacy work where, you brought up like, agricultural conditions or, I'm thinking of like something like here in Michigan, like the, Flint water crisis or somewhere where you have a group of people who are really affected by a big public problem and you're trying to understand it more fully. Is that typical of Photovoice where we're bringing people together and we're bringing people together around some kind of a problem that you're trying to build understanding?
Yeah, that's the heart and soul of Photovoice. And so it's thought of as a participatory action technique. And so participatory, everybody that's involved is thought of as being on equal standing with the facilitator, that they are experts on their own lived experiences, that they have something to contribute to the process. And Flint water crisis, guess what? There was a Photovoice project around the Flint water crisis. And it's trying to tackle those social problems that we all face. And so for me, the problem is interfaith understanding. It's that divide between what I saw, the certain flavors of Christianity aligning politically in divisive ways that we think of under the term of polarization, that were not productive, that didn't seem like they were loving their neighbor. Like I said earlier, I mean, I don't mean to point fingers. I struggle with this myself, but I think one of the big problems that the world faces right now is being able to get along with differences of what we'd think of ultimate considerations of, like, when we're talking about religion, we're talking about the deepest meanings that people have, the ways that people live their lives and make choices, from everything to where they'll live to what they'll buy and who they'll like, all of the important considerations that we have. And sometimes those considerations appear to be going in different directions and cause frictions. I'm perfectly comfortable with differences. In fact, I think that differences shouldn't be dividing us. They should be our greatest asset. They should be a resource for us. One of the things that I love in using Photovoice to address this, I guess, is a problem of perception. I think that anything like polarization or prejudice or invisibility is a problem of perception. And that's really the thing that we're going after. And it's one thing to hear or to read words or to hear words or to see charts and graphs and numbers about people's experiences. It's a totally different thing when you tell someone a story. So, for example, there's this time that it really affected me as the facilitator, listening to a participant who was Muslim talking about their prayer practices. And they happened to be a pharmacist, and they brought a picture of their prayer rug in their pharmacy picture like walls of medicine and prayer rug. And I was fascinated just by the picture itself, much less the story that was told. And it was this story of them just, hey, this is an important thing for me. And this is what it looks like in my daily life. And it involves these things. And, before I pray, I wash, and then I make sure that the prayer rug is pointed in the right direction. And I do these prayers, and the questions that followed that, you pray, but you wash first. And what do you wash, and why do you wash it? And wait a second, are you in the men's room and at the drugstore, like with your foot up in the sink? And watching people piece this all together, and to be curious. And then that person explaining what they do and why they do it. And this realization that, oh, this is hard. Like, as a Christian, I can pray if I wanted to, anytime, any place, anywhere, and very few people are going to have any problem with that. As soon as this new friend, this pharmacist friend shows up with the prayer rug underneath their arm, trying to find a spot to pray, there are little alarm bells in everybody's heads. Maybe not everybody, but a lot of people in our culture. And fitting that into an American schedule isn't easy. Like, we're in the month of Ramadan right now. It isn't easy. And seeing the dedication and the hard work that it does to follow that spiritual discipline of prayer, I look at my life and I'm like, Roman, you probably, if you call yourself a Christian, maybe you should pray a little bit. I'm just not good at that. So I take this inspiration from my new Muslim friend to be a better Christian. I'm reconsidering this practice that is similar in our traditions. I'm never going to buy a prayer rug. I'm not going to do it 5 times a day. I'm not going to wash before I do. I'm not going to face in a particular direction. That's not what's happening. What's happening is what in the field of interfaith work is called holy envy. And it's me looking at someone else's tradition and saying, there is something genuinely beautiful here. There's something genuinely beautiful with Muslim prayer practices. I want that. I want a little bit of that beauty in my own life. And I go back to my own tradition and say, where can I find it? How could I build that in? Our work isn't about getting in a circle and singing Kumbaya or converting people to one religious tradition. It's actually quite the opposite. It's about appreciating the beauty of difference, seeing how that beauty can become part of our own lives, and reaching back into our own traditions and discovering new ways to be faithful, to love our neighbor. And, I haven't found a religious tradition yet that loving one's neighbor isn't an important part of it.
Yeah. There's a lot of empathy in what you're saying. I think there's a lot of beauty and appreciation. And that ends up benefiting us as individuals as well as communities. And I appreciate in this example too, how much it's not about persuasion, how much it's not about trying to convert someone else to your point of view, how much it's about just trying to find common ground and go from there. And I think that's something that's lost sometimes in terms of, ideas of growth and community building is like, well, we need more people to see the world the way we do. And maybe sometimes that's helpful, but also it can be really helpful just to understand the way other people see the world and for them to understand you and to try to move forward on that basis. And I know that's something that a lot of the people who are listening to this interview are going to appreciate just because it's so much a part of community building work.
Yeah, I think, sometimes people are eager to solve the big problem right out of the gate. The problem is important, whatever it might be, but we don't do enough of the pre-work necessary to get to solutions. And what I like about Photovoice and the way that we practice it is a progression. I don't want to start by talking about the challenge that you personally face in your community, we'll get there. Who are you? Who am I? Who are we? How can we move forward in a conversation without having some basic context of who we are, our roles in our community, how we flourish? It's then that we can create a space that's safe and productive, where things like understanding and empathy and solidarity can grow. But we have to do the pre-work. Sometimes the problem is so big and so urgent that we have to jump right in, and I understand that. But whenever possible, if we can build toward that, knowing that there is an end goal of change, that there are a couple of steps that I think we should take at the beginning, and that's knowing each other.
We're wrapping up here. Are there any pieces of advice you would have for, I'd say, both the community builders and the creative professionals who might be listening to this interview and thinking about their own work and how they can bring people together? Any lessons you learned over the past several years that you'd want to share with them?
I think the thing that comes to mind initially is, we're living in a visual age. Last year, the world created 2 trillion, with a T, 2 trillion new photographs. That's a lot of pictures. That's something around 63,000 pictures per second. If we printed those out as 5x7s, the stack would take us past the moon by a third of the distance between the Earth and the moon. It's a lot of pictures. It's impossible to really get your head around. Everybody's making photos. I see this as an incredible opportunity. The visual has become the vernacular, and it's up to us, whether you're a creative professional, a community builder, an academic, whatever your role is to step back and ask yourself, how can we use this technology that everybody has access to in ways to build community, understand the challenges that people face, and engage new audiences with those needs in ways that lead to change, that empower folks, that help us move forward. So I guess, that's that conversation I had with my friend Michael in the Duke Dining Hall in 2017. It was us saying, what's my place in this? I see a problem. What are the things that I have that I could put toward that to address it? And for me, it was this tool from visual sociology. And I'm sure that all of your listeners have a tool called a smartphone. And it's thinking creatively and carefully, thoughtfully about ways to use that as a tool. So often, we take it for granted. We just have this thing, and I snap pictures with it, and I document my life, and I post on social media because I'm supposed to, or whatever it is. But those cameras are a powerful tool for storytelling, and there are a lot of processes out there that can be used, like Photovoice, to bring about change through conversations about photos.
If I'm listening and I want to learn more about Photovoice, get a sense of how it works, understand your work a little bit more, what's the best way for me to connect with what you're doing?
Well, I think the easiest thing is to check out our website, interfaithphotovoice.org. On there, you can learn a little bit about our work. We have some blogs on there that tell our story. But honestly, I think the best way would be to sign up for one of our free monthly online workshops where they get to do what you did, Tom, to kind of stumble into the process and learn by doing. I would much rather show someone what it's like than explain what it's like. So that would be my recommendation. Join us for one of those workshops if you have the time. It's an hour and a half, and you were already the best advertisement, Tom, so I don't think I need to say much more.
I'll just underscore that if it's not clear. You offer these for free. These are really kind of just a toehold to the community to help people understand how this kind of process works. And I think that's incredibly generous of you. And I can't recommend it highly enough for anyone who's interested in learning more about Photovoice.
Thanks, Tom.
I think I probably said it a dozen times in the interview, but if you ever have the opportunity to join one of the free intro Photovoice sessions that Roman offers, I'd really encourage you to do so. I've been a part of a lot of different types of facilitated dialogue, and I'm not sure I've ever felt so quickly connected to a group of strangers on a Zoom as I did in our 90 minutes or so of Photovoice exchange. I don't think that was a fluke. Roman and his team have spent years designing the conditions for exactly that sort of experience, and they've learned how to use their craft in order to bring people together. Story is one of the most foundational tools we have for finding each other. Roman and his team are doing something important by making space for that and putting the tools back in everyone's hands. If you're listening to this as an organizational leader or community builder, I would strongly recommend you think about the telling of your community's story as a participatory and collaborative act. When you work to understand and share that story as a group, you'll find a more full, authentic, and engaging narrative than you could ever develop in isolation. And you'll have a community who is connected and eager to share that story out with whoever needs to hear it next. Or if you're listening to this episode as a storyteller, a researcher, or a creative professional, I hope you'll consider how your process could be its own vehicle for community engagement, in the way that Roman has developed Photovoice. How could you shift from doing work of the community to doing work with the community? How would your work change? What might be more challenging, but also what might get better? Remember, story doesn't have to be complicated in order to be real, or in order to bring people together. I'd love to hear what you're trying. Send me a message at storylinking.com/talk. I'm Tom Leitz, and this is Storylinking.